Hi, I'm Peter Gives, a Jesuit priest and director of A Faith That Does Justice. I'd like to take another moment this week to talk about our Sunday readings and the scriptural readings that we will see in our churches as we approach our weekend. To me, they really speak of God's presence in the midst of unjust human suffering, an idea, a concept that for many people in our modern world is very difficult to understand or even accept. And yet I think what our readings are telling us today is that God sometimes uses innocent human suffering as part of God's larger plan for the salvation of this world to a world that is in great need of redemption. So I'll talk on three levels. One is the scriptures themselves. Second is the idea of human suffering, how prevalent it is in our world today, especially through the idea of structural sin. And finally, a call to action. What can we do to really undo some of the damage that has been done that causes so many people to die before their time? So the scriptures, the Jewish scriptures, Job, the book of Job, has been called by some the first novel ever written. It's a story about a just man. That calamity has struck. He has lost his family, his land, his cattle, his wealth is all gone, taken from him. And his friends tell him that it's really the result of his own sinfulness, that divine retribution is at play. He is now going to pay for the sinfulness of his life. Job objects. He says, I am a decent man, and I do not deserve what is happening. He registers a complaint before God that takes up most of the book. But by its end, God finally speaks. And in it, Job comes to realize the omnipotence of God. God's ways are not Job's ways. And God's understanding and plan for this world exceed anything Job can possibly understand. And so in the end, Job relents of his complaint. He trusts that somehow God is present in his suffering. And in the end, what we find is that Job's well-being has been restored. He is a decent man, and God has acknowledged that. Our gospel reading is somewhat different. Jesus becomes the presence of God's healing power in this world. We hear the story of him healing Peter's mother-in-law. And beyond that, the multitude of people begin to hear about it. They approach him. People who are demonized, people who are suffering from different maladies come to him. He heals them all as signs of the kingdom of God that will come one day in its fullness. A world where there will be love for all, where there will be compassion at human suffering, and where justice will be done. The demons who seem to think they can control Jesus find out very quickly that Jesus is in control. The Spirit of God rests upon him, and it is he who speaks in God's name, on God's behalf, so that all people might know the fullness of life that God desires for them. And so we might ask, secondly, what does it mean? And we are in the midst of a world where structural sin continues to dominate so many people's lives. Structural sin is often caused by a very few people, and it has implications or effects that reach out to parts of this world that encompass millions of people. These people are really called by theologians today, at least some of them, to be the crucified people of history, the poor, the oppressed, and the marginalized, whose lives are taken advantage of. Theologians will say what they're really doing is really witnessing to or reenacting Jesus' passion and death in this world to a world still so in need of redemption. They challenge us as human beings to transform our lives, to accept God's offer of salvation, and to work on behalf of the common good of all God's people so that all may have an opportunity to become the people that God desires them to be. And so finally, we might step back and say, what can one person do? What can we possibly do in the face of structural injustice that is so vast in this world and that takes the lives of so many people? What we can do is to live our lives, living the values as Christians that Jesus lived by, living his love, his compassion, his sense of justice for all God's people, living our faith in action, living a love that is active, one that goes into the heart of human suffering and that will deal with it when they see it, work against human sinfulness where it can, and try to undo the structures that it can undo. and ask and join in other operations where more can be done by a more unified effort on behalf of many people. So these are some things to think about as we move forward into the weekend. The readings are powerful, and they challenge us to really look at who we are and how we choose to live our faith. Christianity is not a passive faith, it's an active faith, one that really lives as Jesus lived in this world. So there's some food for thought. I hope it's helpful to you. I look forward to continuing to speak with you on a weekly basis, offering some brief reflection about our Sunday readings in the hope that we can each go deeper into our own faith and live our faith in action on behalf of God's people. So thank you very much. Be well, be safe, and I hope to speak with you next week.